Tonya here, your host of The Alchemy of Me, where we navigate the anatomy of humanity through the lens of science and spirituality. Let's unearth the layers and unravel the systems in place that dim who we are and how we live and experience life. On this journey together, we'll weave in an eclectic blend of mind, body, energy, medicine, concepts, tools, and practices that'll nourish the seeds, the fire, that gold of intelligence that is you. This is an opportunity, your opportunity to reclaim, to rediscover, to transform, to alchemize you. The Alchemy of Me show starts now. Hello, Tonya here, your host of The Alchemy of Me, where we explore and navigate the anatomy of humanity through the lens of science and spirituality. And today I'm excited to have Dr. Lou Walters back on the show. Welcome, Dr. Lou.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. As a recap, so if you have not had the opportunity to experience the first time Dr. Lou was on, it was a few months ago, but we thought it would be kind of a nice extension to bring Dr. Lou back and really to go a little deeper. And so just to give you a recap before we dive in, Dr. Lou specializes in treating people, not diseases. He graduated from the National University of Natural Medicine in 2009. His focus is to go beyond the symptoms and help people work to find the source of their health issues so they can thrive in life. And Dr. Lou, welcome again. And is there anything else you want to add? Obviously, you're a naturopathic doctor. That's probably one thing I'll just throw out there. You are my doctor. And so, I guess as we go on this journey today to talk about the lens we're going to look through today is getting to the source of health issues. And so as my doctor, I give you full permission to share, some of the stuff we worked on together on my health journey. And really the goal of this discussion with you, and then, you two sharing whatever comes up through your health journey. But it's really, I feel like it's an opportunity to use real life and some of the hard stuff that we have been through, but then also knowing that we're all going through things, and there are different ways to look at health, and there are different ways to approach health. And so what if we looked at it through this lens? And so I'll just pause there and see if you want to add anything else before we dive in.
No, that pretty much summarizes it. I mean, last time we kind of did a flyby on, what does it mean to really get to the source, but we didn't really do a case study or really talk through what does that process look like. We talked about different levels and different approaches to healthcare. But I wanted to come back and really go through, when we talk about getting to the source, what does that process look like? What are people either signing up for, or if they're considering it, is this for me or not?
Yes. So if you could, going into that, one thing that's been very helpful for me, I'm a visual person, and you kind of have this way of describing the health journey in a way that to me feels really relatable, because I'm how much I love nature and the earth, and anytime you can bring in, because that's where we come from, the earth. And so I love your analogy around what the source is. So if you can kind of just walk us through that, that's our foundation. And then I think everything will just flow from there, pun intended, of course.
So, in the office, I have a diagram of this that I go walk through with patients. But if you visualize a river coming down out of the mountains, now as the river's starting, it's coming from basically a pool up in the mountains. And as it's coming down, it's going through some waterfalls, some turbulent times. And then when it gets to the bottom, it begins to flow across the plains. And that the turbulent waterfalls can stir some things up, but they may not show up for a long time. And as the river flows, there are, in my diagram, there's some drain pipes coming in. And some of those are a trickle and some of those are pouring in. And these are polluting the waters of our body and of our health and of our mind. And by the time we get towards the bottom of the river and the water is real polluted, we get signs and symptoms. And if we get enough of those, we give it a disease name. This is typically where people go to the doctor. In America, at least, we don't really have a healthcare system. We have a sick care system. People go when they're sick, they get something, or when they feel better, then they don't want to go back to the doctor until they feel sick again. So one approach is, if you're in that polluted water, as you're having signs and symptoms, is to take something just to manage the symptoms of the pollution. Pharmaceutical, that can also be a natural product as well. It's how we're using it, which is the important thing here. So are we just trying to manage symptoms? That's one level. So, I'll ask people, we'll go through each of these and what are you looking for? So it's very, if somebody's wanting that approach, then trying to do something else isn't going to be helpful. We're going to be, conflicting against each other. Another approach is then to try to start working to figure out what are those sources of pollution. What is this toxic coming from? Is it something from a relationship? Is it something we're eating, something in the environment? And then trying to remove that from our system so that we're not continually polluting our river, our waters. So, this is definitely a necessary process to get back to, is we need to, if we're polluting our water with a poison, we need to stop polluting our water with the poison. We got to get that out. And then we need to clean up the water. And for some people, that's as far as they're going to go. And oftentimes them and their doctor will feel like they got to the root or the source of the issue with that. We'll use gluten as an example. Somebody's having headaches. Their doctor does a food test. It comes back, they're reacting to gluten. They stop eating gluten. Their headache goes away and they overall feel better. They think, I got to the root cause because it's gluten. Now, from my perspective, why can some people eat gluten and others can't? Why is that a trigger for them? And that's really then the work that needs to happen, is to keep going back upriver to what led to that setup in the first place, that trigger in the first place. And then in that process to get there, we have to continue to detox and drain the system physically and emotionally, but then also reset all the organ systems to make sure they're functioning as well as we can. And really, what we're doing there is one, getting the system cleaned up, but also getting it ready for getting back to the top of that mountain. It's not an easy journey. And we're getting them physically and mentally ready for that, but also the trust between the two of us, that things are going to come up when we start climbing that mountain, that if they're not prepared for it and not strong enough for it, they're going to quit the climb right away.
Yeah, and maybe too, if it's not maybe in alignment with their, there's not that curiosity where, we have been told that, if you, like, again, you go back to, you remove gluten and then there's no more problem.
Yeah.
And so you've kind of have that pattern of like, well, that's it, we're all done. But then, like you said, bringing in, obviously gluten, as for me, has been a problem for many years. I think it was 2015. And when I started having like really weird reactions, so that was 9 years ago, that my body started telling me that gluten was an issue. And there was a problem and it wasn't gluten. And so that's where it is such an interesting evolution, because then later on, 8 years later, it turns out to be something that, we don't know what it was at that point, but my body was telling me something wasn't quite right. And it took a full 8 years for my stubborn self to.
Gluten was one of the triggers, but it was the problem. And
exactly
what happens, what I have found at least is, if we'll say gluten is a trigger and we avoid gluten and we don't go back upriver and deal with what led to that in the first place, over time, the person typically develops other triggers. other things start setting their system off. So then we're
Yeah,
constantly trying to avoid triggers that are showing up as opposed to dealing with what is it, what are the buttons that these triggers are pushing? Let's get
yeah,
back to that.
yes. Yes, and that's exactly what happened in my case. So I don't know, do we I guess to should we maybe from here maybe just describe like
Sure.
what so it's been about a year since I first came to see you. Um and it's funny because, I think when I came to see you, I was like, hey, I'm not feeling well. I don't really know what's wrong. Um and there was a lot of stuff that was wrong.
You had a
Um
long list of things. So
yeah.
you weren't sleeping well, your GI was off, you were
Mhm.
having a fatigue and concentration issues, and um, your face was fuller, you felt like you were gaining
Yeah.
weight, having trouble losing it. Is there anything else that I'm not remembering?
I stopped cycling too.
Hmm.
So that like my hormones were literally everything felt like it was off. And from the food, bringing the food back in, again, gluten, it had been years since I'd had gluten, and then it was dairy. And then do you remember like it started to be, I think it was oats. I think it was literally like everything
Mhm.
was affecting me, which is the GI piece. Not to get too graphic for people.
So, it's a very typical presentation as far as lots of things, lots of symptoms. I'm concerned. I want to figure this out. And so what
Yep.
we did was we did some lab tests. So after taking a good history and doing a physical exam, we decided I think there's something going on with your endocrine system that we need to figure out. So we tested your
Yep.
thyroid. We did TSH, free T4, free T3, and a TPO antibody to see was your immune system producing antibodies to your thyroid. And we also did a test called the Dutch test, which was looking at estrogen levels, progesterone levels, testosterone, DHEA, melatonin, and a cortisol curve through the day. First thing in the morning, we should have high cortisol, and it should gradually decrease until midnight and through the night. And we were just looking to see what is your endocrine system doing? And we definitely got some abnormal findings.
Can you before we do that, can because what I've realized is that a lot of people don't really know what the endocrine system is. Can you just give like a high level, what it does and its functions? And because I think there's a lot of people out there that are maybe have symptoms and they don't even realize it.
Mhm. So
Yeah.
the endocrine system is made up of glands that secrete hormones, and those hormones will then go to tissue in the body and stimulate or inhibit function, depending on what the body's doing. So, say, um, the thyroid gland basically speeds things up, metabolism, everything else. Every cell in the body has receptors for thyroid hormone. So when somebody has too much thyroid hormone, hyperthyroid, they'll get, their heart racing, they'll have anxiety, they can't sleep, they have diarrhea, they're losing weight. And then somebody with hypo, not enough thyroid hormone, everything slows down. So they have brain fog, depression,
Mhm.
gaining weight, constipation, those sort of symptoms. We'll say the pancreas has produces cells that affect blood sugar. It produces insulin, which then will basically open doors on the cells to get sugar into the cell so that we can use it for energy. So different glands will just produce these almost like text messages going to certain cells in the body to get them to do something, whether it's speed up or slow down or to make some sort of change. Is that
Yeah.
succinct enough and clear enough?
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful because and I will just say, and tell me if you agree or disagree with this, but I feel like we don't understand the system that well. Like it's very complicated, complex.
It is incredibly complicated, and we're always learning more about it in
Yeah.
medicine. Like we tend to get this idea that, doctors, we know everything about the body. And I always think of it as a bookcase in an airplane hangar that goes on in infinity. Like that, the bookcase is the
Oh,
amount of information that we know, and then there's all this other stuff that we haven't learned yet. So
yeah.
we're doing the best we can with that bookshelf that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy because I think a lot of us we just take everything as is. And so it's really important for us to get curious about what we do or do not know or understand so we can ask the right questions.
Mhm. A prime example is, I was a high school teacher and I taught molecular genetics in my biology class. So for, decades, it was thought that DNA was basically a cookbook for proteins. It had recipes for proteins. And when they did the Human Genome Project, they expected to find one gene, which is a recipe for a protein, for each protein in the body. So there'd be, about 300 plus thousand different genes, and they only found
Mhm.
about 30 plus thousand. So the numbers weren't even close. So it
Mhm.
completely negated what we had thought this was a truth about, the human body. And then all of a sudden we realize, oh, this epigenetics thing, that the things we're doing in our life can alter how the genes get expressed. And one gene, depending on the circumstances, can code for multiple different proteins. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's all of that is so interesting because as you said, like we're learning, like we're it's evolving, we're learning, and that's in really in any field. And it reminds me of a little bit of a parallel, but in my background with groundwater and studying water supply and how we impact water. And I think this relates because it's like the quality of water we put into our body matters, and I remember, I don't know, this was maybe like 10 years ago or so, you know, you test for certain things. And it's the same with like, you went through and you looked at all my symptoms, and based on that, you made a determination to select certain things. Like, these are the things that we need to look at. And then with water, it's like, well, you look at all of the different sources around of potential contaminants. But if you're unaware of certain things will crop up, and there's that whole, the PFAS thing, and like all of these things you don't realize that might be in the water, they could be there. We just don't even know they're there if we don't test for them. And so this is kind of like we're learning, learning, learning. We'll continue to learn, and just being open to um, letting ourselves evolve as this is kind of continues to be a discovery process. So let's pause there for a quick break, and we come back, we can dive into like the next piece, like after this is the cliffhanger after, the results of the data, and to see, the findings. So yeah, we'll be back in just a moment after the break. Welcome back, Tonya here. We were having a lot of fun during the break. So welcome back. Sorry you missed that. We will continue on with our hopefully exciting discussion about the endocrine system, um, and actually more of like the case study piece. So where we left off with Dr. Lou right before the break was the cliffhanger of the lab test that he ran right before, or I guess after I came in to see him. And then I guess I'll just pass it over to you, Dr. Lou, to yeah, to unveil what
sure.
happened.
So the endocrine system is real complex, and one gland's hormones often affect other glands. They interact, and there's feedback loops with the brain, and it's really a intricate network that influences each other. So one thing being off can affect other glands and other levels. So the idea isn't just to medicate one imbalance or all the imbalances, but try to really get the whole system back in tune. And what can get it out of tune in the first place? There's lots of things. It could be stresses in the body, whether it be emotional stresses, environmental stresses, what we're eating, whether we're sleeping or not. And so there's lots of things that can be at play. So we got your thyroid results back first.
Mhm.
And your TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, was a little bit high. So what that indicates is that's the hormone the brain sends to the thyroid to get the thyroid to produce its hormones. Now, if the thyroid is struggling to keep up with the amount that the brain wants it to produce, the brain will produce more of that TSH to try to, almost like yelling at the thyroid to work harder. Um,
Mhm.
your T4 and T3 levels were on the low end of normal, but still normal. So your body was straining to stay normal, but it was there. And then your
Mhm.
TPO antibodies were elevated. So we wouldn't call that an autoimmune disease, but an auto-inflammatory process that, it hadn't left unchecked in time. It likely would have become an autoimmune disease, but it was at least, in the beginnings of it. So we caught it early.
Mhm.
But it didn't really make sense for all your symptoms. So
Yeah.
we were waiting for the results from the Dutch test. And when it came back, so what should happen first thing in the morning, cortisol levels should be high and then gradually decrease through the day. And your morning cortisol level was skyrocketed. Not just a little bit elevated. I mean, it was in the stratosphere. It was
Yeah.
out of normal range. And after 17 years of looking at these things, I was like, never seen one that high before. Uh, so at your appointment, we went through everything, and I said, I think there's a mass somewhere. We got to figure out where. Now,
Mhm.
our options, it could have been a mass on the adrenal glands. It could have
Mhm.
been a mass on the pituitary gland in the brain. So we had to do further testing to try to distinguish which one it was, which we did. And we ruled out that it didn't seem like it was going to be a pituitary adenoma, a mass on the pituitary gland. So I suspected it was a mass on the adrenals. And we needed to send you to an endocrinologist to get the imaging and the information we needed to figure that out. Um,
Mhm.
and I did warn you that what was going to happen when they looked at the tests that I had ordered, because naturopathic doctors don't always order the same tests that medical doctors do. And as with
Mhm.
anything, if it's something we don't understand or know, we kind of just say that it's not valid or we're not going to even touch that. So then they ended up running their own tests, which has verified what I had found.
Yeah. And it's funny because I remember we had a call right, I think it was like the day after Christmas or something. And you told me, you were like, well, essentially you were telling me like, I don't think it's the masses in your brain. It's probably your adrenal gland. And I remember just being like, yes. And like so excited. I was like, I still knew like not great, but to me, I was like, it's just, considering the circumstances, because it wasn't just that, it was the fact that like we were getting closer to figuring out what the hell was going on, which felt good. And then
So
it
through all
wasn't
this,
imagining
we
it.
had we had to determine, where is this coming from? Where are these abnormal numbers coming from? And then, if it's a mass, is it benign? Is it malignant? So, we
Mhm.
had to step by step go through it and figure it all out. Uh,
Yeah.
as it turned out, it was a mass on your adrenal glands. So the symptoms that you were having were from massive amounts of cortisol in your system. So we call that Cushing's, sort of response, where the adrenals are producing way too much cortisol hormones, which then can affect, your ovaries and estrogen and progesterone and your thyroid. And then all the symptoms you were having, it was classic, what we call moon face, where your face looks much,
Yeah.
and the sleep issues and holding weight, especially around the midsection. It was all just the signs and symptoms of too much cortisol in your system. And then we figured out where it was coming from, which was that mass. So then the next step was they had to go in and figure out, is it benign or is it malignant? And they
Mhm.
needed to remove the mass. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that process.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it's interesting because I will just share because I think that the weight gain was so wild and it happened so quickly. If you recall, it was like a month and I gained like 20 or 25 pounds. Um, And so if anybody's curious what that looks like, the first couple episodes of this show that I did with Dr. Pat, I was actually before my surgery. And so I had just seen, I saw a clip just recently, and I'm telling you, Dr. Lewis, like, holy shit. Like everything, like just so sick. I mean, when you're in it, you don't realize, I mean, I knew I felt terrible, but it was really, really bad. And so, I just still remember, fortunately, going through the whole, transition into like having this amazing opportunity to receive treatment with you and with, my other doctor, Dr. Cameron, who has another natural approach. And then also, my dear friend, Dr. Pruitt, who is Western medicine, and then her helping to navigate and really just that bridge into Western medicine, which honestly for me was very challenging because I'm kind of a skeptic around, because I ask a lot of questions, but just having that team of people I trusted, and then too, the surgeon and my endocrinologist, like they just, it all together, while was very uncomfortable. I feel like a lot of, for me, what helped was, some of the other modalities that I use with breath and meditation. And I wasn't really able to do yoga. Just my balance and stuff was off too. But all of the practices, it's almost like I've been training for this to support me to try to balance as much as I can into that process. And then ultimately, they had to remove the mass in February. And that was, again, it's like that's, there's something physically there, and it was removed. And then there was a 8-week recovery after that. And I don't really want to focus on that because to me, I think what's important maybe is like how it got there. And then too, like after the fact, for, as you know, like the recovery, when you remove something like that, the adrenal glands are very challenging to regulate. And so it's like a year of trying to allow your system to just reset and reequilibrate. And so I don't know if it makes sense to move forward and like talk about maybe the why.
Sure.
Why, Dr. Lou, did I?
Before we talk about the why, I'd like to put
Yeah,
this up to this point in context with the river that
sure.
we talked about.
Yeah, good call.
So if when you came in and had all that list of symptoms,
Yep.
the treating the symptom, the polluted river, the first approach that I talked about would just have been giving you things to manage, giving you something to help you sleep, giving you something to, try to help stimulate and balance your cycles, and giving something for brain fog and energy, and not really dealing with, where is this coming from? So that's a lot of people, that's the approach that they want, is just manage the symptoms. Then, we did our due diligence, and we found this mass. We surgically had it removed. So some people like, okay, we got to the root cause of it. I was having all these symptoms because I had this mass in my adrenals. We took the mass out. Now I'm getting better, and I'm feeling better. I'm losing weight. So all the things are going away. But again, that's where a lot of people think that they got to the root source, and that's where they stop. And for me, the question is well, why did you get an adrenal mass in the first place? Because if we don't try to pursue that, you might end up getting another one or somewhere else, or some other thing, some other expression of adaptive physiology that shows up. And then to your points, all that network of the endocrine system, your best example is if somebody takes a course of high dose prednisone, they have to taper down. They have to gradually lower the dose, and the reason being is that's mimicking the adrenal hormones. So if you give high doses, the brain then stops stimulating the adrenals to produce as much hormone. So if you were to just stop that pill at a high dose and go cold turkey, the adrenals would shut down, and we can't live without those. That's why the doctor will do a slightly lowering dose to bring your adrenals back online and your brain to signal that to happen. So now that we removed all those hormones, we're trying to calibrate your brain and your adrenals to get back to normal levels.
Yeah, and I probably could have mentioned too that it was the mass also.
Mhm.
They needed to remove my adrenal gland as well,
Yeah.
as part of that. So it was, I don't remember how big it was, but it felt sizable. The adrenal gland's not very big. And so it's when I asked the doctor, I'm like, can you just like separate it out when you're in there? Not really. Not an
So
option.
for those who don't know, the adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys. They're normally about the size of an almond. And we can't live without them. So, if for some reason they had taken both adrenals, you would have to be on adrenal, supplement hormones in
Yeah.
perpetuity. But
Yeah.
you still got one, so you're okay.
Yeah. And though to speak to that, like it's if I continue to operate in a way, I mean, that's the thing, like we removed that and now what? Like what's next?
So the why that you asked about
Mm-hmm.
or that. So if we looked at your lifestyle up until then, you were a typical type A achiever that goes, and you would take a break from work by running a marathon.
That's true.
Your stress release was to find something almost as stressful, to push yourself constantly to get things done and to achieve, which
Mm-hmm.
our adrenals help us with. So, the
Mm-hmm.
fact that mass showed up is not necessarily surprising. Now, there's multiple layers to this, but if we look at different phases of development, there's different organs, glands, and parts of the brain that are maturing at different times. In addition to them physically maturing, the wiring between the brain and the organ and gland is also getting set during those time frames. If either one stressful event or multiple stressful events happen and don't get addressed and resolved during that time frame, that wiring doesn't get laid down the way it's supposed to, and the signal isn't as good, and the maturation doesn't happen the way it's supposed to. So,
Mm-hmm.
we'll use the adrenal glands are maturing up until 18 months. So if there was stresses prior to that, not just after you were born, but even in utero, and going back
Mm-hmm.
to epigenetics, what your mom and dad's health were prior to conceiving.
Yep.
So all of that can set things in motion that then later become an issue. We'll say the digestive system and the thyroid is maturing from 18 months to 7 years. So if there's stresses in that period, that can affect it. So we'll use, say, somebody with IBS. Commonly, there was some stresses that happened in that time frame that area didn't develop, and the wiring and connection to the brain didn't develop as the way it should have due to those stresses. So then now every time they get overwhelmed or get stressed, it shows up in their gut. So to really heal that, we have to go back to that time frame and rewire and reset that. And then all the phases that come after that, it's like a building. If you don't have a solid foundation, what you build on top is now on shaky ground, and it didn't really develop properly because there was faulty wiring underneath it. So, so people can have, say something happens during up to 18 months that affects their adrenals, but then they also, they start getting GI symptoms. They go through puberty and they have irregular menses and, all sorts of, symptoms beforehand with PMS and heart issues later on. And it all comes back to what the initial thing was. Now, when I talk about stresses, most people think, big things like my parents got divorced, or, my grandfather
Mm-hmm.
died, or I was abused. But it can be from the perspective of a child. I lost my favorite teddy bear, and it was
Yeah.
traumatizing to me at age 3 that we lost that teddy bear. So the person looking at it as an adult may not even remember the things and we often in America like the one thing item, the magic bullets, that it was this one thing that does everything, and it can be an accumulation of things.
No, yeah, that's super important. Obviously, like I am also. What happened? What did I do? And just hearing you describe that, we haven't gone into that detail because that's actually part we're working on right now.
Yeah.
I think of like the post-op healing piece, and I will say like something I am finding is just, and I've known this, but it's so interesting because in my early years, always had very big emotions and didn't know what to do with them. And so I learned to just not do anything. It was like I don't want to feel these big feelings. I'm just going to shut it down. And so all of that energetically is not good for the system. And I'm finding that even as a 42-year-old, that I almost like have to go through and name. It's like I'm having to train myself now. Like, am I angry? No, that doesn't really resonate. Am I sad? Like I actually, and then I'll feel it in my body and I'll start to get emotional. But I have to actually, it's like I need an emotions chart.
You are not alone in that. Um, now that's part of the process of getting back and resetting things is the mental emotional component, which often gets ignored in medicine, is critical. Um,
Yeah.
our subconscious is developing when we're young, and we don't have a filter to, if say our parents says that they get upset, as parents sometimes do, and they get frustrated and they just say something, and they apologize, they didn't mean it, like, oh, you're a terrible singer, we'll say that as an example,
Yeah.
into our subconscious as a program that's true. We can't say, well, they were mad, they were angry, they didn't mean it. It just goes automatically in that, and then we have all these programs running in our subconscious from childhood that
Yeah.
then affects us as adults. It can be hard to change. I know as I've gone through my process, I've had things come up that I've said something. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not me. That's my dad. Like that's so
Yeah.
hey, that's not a me thing. That's a him thing. But it's somehow
Yeah.
got imprinted in my subconscious and in my patterns, as it does for kids watching their parents. Um, Talking about getting back to the source, one, I think, important component, both for you and for listeners, is
Yep.
that most of the time people come in and they think that, okay, we're going to figure this out and get it fixed in 3 or 4 visits and I'm good. I have found that this process typically takes 2 to 4 years, depending on the person. There's no set time frame. It takes as long as it needs to for the person. But working back and getting the system cleaned up, getting it prepared, and the person ready for the process of actually doing that rewiring typically takes several years. The value in that is incredible afterwards, but
Mhm.
not everybody has the patience or the fortitude to do that, which is fine. But that's why we talk about it, to make sure this is what you want to do.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you brought that up because some people, we get used to it's like just pop a pill, it's fine, move on. However, let's think of how long it has taken to create these patterns and behaviors. It's like it took me 41 years to get to that point to create that. And so, like you said, like if it takes 10% of the amount of time it's taken me to create that, that's not bad. That's not I mean, you're rewiring, like you said, you're rewiring or um, creating a new way of living in a way that is, I don't know if you want to bring it back to like the visual of, upriver or up the mountain.
Oh, you're
Like
waiting for me
how?
to.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you want to, or we could just
No,
stay here
that's
and like
where
stare at each other.
that's typically what that waterfall that I mentioned is. It's
Yeah.
those events in childhood, those stresses that kind of cause some of these things to get put into motion. And we often think, it's like with food where, okay, well, ate something and it didn't immediately cause a reaction, so therefore it's not the food. It's like, well, sometimes the immune system, it might take 10 days after you eat something before it shows up as a thing. So we don't always get that instant. So things could be almost like it's a it's lying in wait, and it just needs some of those triggers to get activated over time, or to get big enough, almost like a spiral, that the spiral gets
Mhm.
bigger and bigger with time, and eventually you get more and more noticeable symptoms, but it can be lurking in the water, um, even though you don't feel it. So it's the idea that we have to get back to reset those things so that you can be resilient. So the idea is that, if you do have some gluten or you experience some stress, your symptoms just don't come right back, and that you're not getting
Yeah.
things, and how you feel, and that feeling that when something happens, oh, I can handle this. I got this. It's not that big a deal. As opposed to, being set off kilter and feeling like it's, such a giant ordeal or thing that you can't handle it, or stressful or whatnot. Um, it affects relationships. It affects, how you perform in your life and enjoyment of life. It's basically switching from that idea that life is happening to me to life is happening for me. That every moment
Mhm.
is happening for us to enjoy and experience, and being able to see it through that lens and not feel constantly behind the eight ball.
Yeah, that's so important because it is ultimately what it comes back to. It's like, why are we here? Like, are we just here to wake up and go to work and then come home and, be here? Or do we want to enjoy and experience a life? And, just reminded me of what we were talking about before the show started, when I was telling you about this morning. Obviously, I've had a lot of changes going on around me, but, you know, my son wakes up and he brings up, he's talking about like giving somebody CPR. And he learned that, and I think Boy Scouts. And, so he's doing the Staying Alive, the Bee Gees. Probably never even heard the song before. And I asked him, I was like, do you know that song? And he said, no, I don't. I was like, well, let's turn it on. And so while naturally I would be preparing for our time together, my son and I are having like a dance party to Staying Alive, which was super fun and unexpected. But those are like those sweet moments of life that we miss if we're so caught up in all of the stuff that really, it's not why we're here. We're here for those sweet little moments of those unexpected moments that are just, I don't know, that just light us up.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And most of us, we get so preoccupied with our day-to-day life or what's going on, or these things, that because we're constantly feeling either inadequate or not enough, or we got to achieve, and we feel like those sort of, that time is wasted if we aren't working towards something, or we're not getting things done, or taking care of our family, as opposed to actually being there with our family.
Yeah. Yeah. And enjoying the sweetness of life. And I would say for me, just working with you and kind of through this process, it's a lot of that inner child stuff where it's like, I'm so serious because it is that whole type A. Why was I so type A?
And
You
that's a good
know?
segue into getting back to
Yeah.
why and where this came from. With your permission to share, you had a tumultuous childhood with lots
Yeah.
of um, struggles and stresses. Is it okay for me to talk a little bit about it from what you've told
Sh-
me?
sure. And I will just say too, like I absolutely love my family. And I believe, and you know this, that I signed up for this. So like this is part of my journey. Um, so I'll just throw that out there. Hopefully they're not too
There is no judgment or blame to anybody
no.
in the family. They're going through what they're going through, and they were doing the best they
Yes.
could given where they were.
Yes. Yep.
But it did have an impact on you. Um,
Yeah.
you know, you had a sibling die when you were 5.
No.
You did not? I thought
No.
in your notes that you said your sister
No, my sister, okay, she almost did. She did not
almost
die.
died. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She
Almost
did
died.
not.
Okay.
She's well. She's
Yeah, I
good.
was like, I was reading your chart last night and definitely had that in there.
No, she had an autoimmune
Mhm.
disorder at about 2. Yeah, so
Yeah, I had
I
that.
was 5.
Okay, I misunderstood when
Yeah,
you were talking and I thought she had passed. But either way, it was a stressful
super
thing
traumatic.
for you at age 5.
Yes.
Family was somewhat unstable due to some alcoholism and some emotional instability that
Yeah.
you kind of took the brunt of sometimes.
Yeah.
You were moving a lot in that early phases, and you tended to get bullied at each school.
Yes, for years.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for that. That was fun.
Um, and then you had at age 15 there was a pretty big event where you were told not to ride your horse, and then you
Mm,
rode it,
yeah.
and then I'll let you say what happened.
I fell off my horse and I hit my head pretty hard, and it was literally the same year that Christopher Reeve. It was within a month of when he fell off his horse and was paralyzed, and I hit my head the same way. And it was very, very traumatic for me and again for my sister because she was the only one there. And then as a result, first love was horses. As a result, that horse was I was no longer allowed to spend time around horses, to ride horses, which is traumatizing
What
for
happened to
me.
that horse that you were riding?
So it's very interesting. So in my memory was that, I created a story around it, which was my horse was murdered because of the decision I made. Right. And so then within the last year or so, I talked to my dad and he was like, that is not what happened. But to me, that's how I remembered it. And he said, no, we sold him because he was crazy. And I was like, well, maybe. And I was, but that was a choice I made. But so like the story I created, and I think that's important because we create stories. And
That is
so,
incredibly important. So even though the reality was different, the story
yeah.
you made up as a kid around that you had lived with for all those decades, and that story impacted, how you thought about things, how you reacted to things, and that's true for all of us. We all create
Yes.
stories around things, and we play a character in that story, and that
Hmm.
story becomes our life, and it becomes our
Hmm.
reality, even if it's not real. It becomes who we are. And our brain, it's the most powerful force in the human brain, is to stay in alignment with our identity, how we see ourselves, how we see ourselves in that story.
Hmm.
So those patterns can then drive everything that we do in our life.
Yes.
Change your story, change your life. That's a Tony Robbins thing.
Yes. Yeah. And if we create that story create a bigger drama around something. And I will tell you, even just talking about it earlier before I realized that, thinking about it, talking about it, I could just feel the icky energy come up because I felt responsible for my horse's death.
Yeah.
Like that was the story I was living with.
Yep. And that our thoughts affect our physiology, and our emotions affect our physiology, which people often get missed. And the example, there's a couple examples I give, but one is most people don't like public speaking. So just thinking about having to get up and speak in front of 10,000 people, people's heart may race, they might get nauseous, stomach cramps, throw up. They're not even doing it, they're just thinking about it. So those thoughts that we have every
Yes.
day and that stress that we put ourselves mentally through will affect our physiology and change our physiology. So, when we talk about pathology, it's really just adaptive physiology. It's just our body reacting to what's happening moment to moment.
Yeah.
And, so the point of all that was there was lots of physical and emotional stresses when you were young. Now, prior to age 18 months, what was going on as far as your mom's health and in the relationship, and when you were post conception, what was going on stress wise for
I
her?
I think there was a lot of, we haven't specifically talked about it, but I think it was very challenging. There was a lot of uh, just sadness. It was hard. I mean, it was a farm family, like not a lot of money. Um, some substance abuse stuff in the home, and Just a lot of unhealed trauma, I think, from both sides of the family. And then just wondering too if like I don't know if I was planned or not. So it's like there's a lot of heavy emotions around that time.
So all those emotions that your mom may have been feeling while she was pregnant, can affect your development and your genetics and what genes are getting expressed and how, and the adrenal, like I said, from conception to 18 months, the adrenals are developing. So you wouldn't have any conscious memory of that time typically, but it doesn't mean it didn't impact you or possibly set this in motion that would eventually lead you to developing an adrenal mass like you did.
Yeah. Yes. And that feels true because it feels like it's been part of my operating system for a long time. I've always been kind of, amplified and that, led into like the why, why I was type A, why I was always trying to achieve, why I would work 20 hours a day. Just like interesting, like if you step back and look like what's going on here. There's more beneath the surface,
Yes.
obviously.
And that's part of the process, is getting your body cleaned up from all that pollution and resetting the
Yeah.
system so there's normal function, but then also then getting, basically, if we think of that mountain, we're gonna have to climb that mountain and go back upriver, and that takes some energy and effort as well. So, I'm a like, let's just get in there and get it done sort of guy. And I initially tried to just, okay, let's just, with patience, let's just get there and get it done, and it didn't go well.
Hmm.
Mainly things came up that they weren't ready for. And
Yeah.
they didn't understand exactly, even though we had talked about it, they really didn't quite grasp what we were doing. And getting their body and their mind ready to be able to handle it. And then also educating them so when things do come up that they understand what's happening and they stay with it. They don't, because that's one thing in our society, is we really try to shy away from discomfort of any kind. And
Yeah.
sometimes we have to go through that discomfort to get to the other side and to heal. And sometimes things will come up, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's got to come up and for it to go.
Yeah. And I think that's really important too, with like just to, as we're wrapping up here, like what you're saying with, why it takes 2 to 4 years to really like heal some of this is because you can almost like create a new trauma from trying to move too quickly, right? So it's like, because if you're not, like you were saying, like if you're not ready to, um if you're not at a point, like I just think of, I'll share this one last piece, and you know about this, but my um boyfriend in college and his best friend were killed in a car accident when I was 17, and super, super traumatic. I didn't have the capacity to heal from both of those losses at the same time. And so I buried it. And it wasn't until very recently, I didn't even realize that I was still carrying that. It's actually been in the last 6 months that that has finally come to the surface. So it's like I wasn't able to touch that until, more recently. So, um, of course, we are out of time, Dr. Lou. I figure we could keep talking forever. We didn't even get to go into your health journey. So maybe that's, for a future discussion. If I feel like these conversations are super helpful for, I know for me, but I think hopefully for others, just getting, again, coming back to like getting curious, thinking of the visual that you shared and kind of woven throughout our entire discussion, and what health can look like, and what when we allow ourselves to think of it in a holistic way. So I don't know if there's one last thing you want to share, Dr. Lou, before we wrap up.
Um, just for wherever you are, because sometimes people, they're just where they are is managing a symptom, and that's okay. And if you're ready to move up to identify triggers, that's great too. And if you just want to you're in a place where you can really, work back to the source and you have that drive and capability, then, seek out practitioners for whatever level you are at.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Liu. Do you want to share your website too? Or I think your contact info is on there. If anybody is just curious about, getting in contact with you.
Sure. It's thesourcewellnesscenter.com. And then I have an Instagram, Dr. Liu Dr. Liu, the Source Wellness Center. And we post videos, and there's some upcoming videos on similar topics.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Liu. And thank you for everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for listening to The Alchemy of Me, where we navigate the anatomy of humanity through the lens of science and spirituality. For more mind, body, energy, medicine concepts, tools, and practices to nourish the seeds, the light, the fire, that gold of intelligence that is you, tune in every first and third Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on TransformationTalkRadio.com. For more information about me and my work, please visit ToniaJohnson.com. That's ToniaJohnson.com.